The night my sister called my 9-year-old son an embarrassment in a room full of investors, she thought she was protecting the family image. What she did not know was that my grandmother had already changed her will months earlier, cutting her out and naming my son the sole heir. Within weeks, the money stopped. Lawyers got involved, and the same people who tried to manipulate my child were being escorted out of our company by security. My name is Maricel Vaughn, and this is the story of how protecting my son cost us our family and exposed who they really were. Chapter 1. The Gala Where Everything Shifted. The ballroom at the Whitmore Hotel in downtown Raleigh smelled like white lilies and polished wood, the kind of scent that tried too hard to feel timeless. Hartwell Atelier was celebrating 35 years in business, and if you believed the banner stretched across the back wall, it was a story about legacy, craftsmanship, and family. Family. I stood just inside the entrance with my hand wrapped around my son's, feeling the weight of that word press against my ribs. Rowan was 9, small for his age, but solid, with dark hair that refused to lie flat no matter how carefully I combed it. He had insisted on changing the buttons to matte brass because he said the shiny ones looked like they were trying too hard. I had smiled at that. He noticed things other people missed. Tonight, he stood very straight beside me, his free hand tucked into his pocket, taking everything in with quiet eyes. "You okay?" I murmured. He nodded once. "I'm fine, Mom." Across the room, my grandmother, Vivian Hartwell, moved slowly through a circle of guests, silver hair swept back, posture still precise at 74. The company she built in 1989 out of a single rented studio now employed 26 people and had cleared just under $11 million in revenue last year. People in Charlotte and Atlanta wore her pieces to charity galas and board meetings. Investors shook her hand like she was a minor institution. Behind her, the Hartwell Atelier logo glowed in warm gold light. Beneath it stood my sister. Daphne Cole had chosen a pale cream gown that skimmed her body just enough to look effortless. She was 42 and had always known how to arrange herself in a room so that attention bent toward her. She had been that way since we were girls in our parents' split-level house in North Raleigh, the golden child, without ever having to ask for the title. She saw us before I had a chance to decide whether to approach her or avoid her. "Maricel," she called, drawing out my name as if it were something fragile she was testing between her fingers. "You made it." "We're family," I said. It would have been strange not to. Her eyes slid to Rowan, assessing. This must be the star of the evening. Rowan shifted slightly closer to me, but didn't hide. He never hid. "This is Rowan," I said evenly. Daphne bent down just enough to be at eye level without actually lowering herself. "Rowan," she said, her voice bright and smooth. "We're so glad you could join us tonight. It's not every day we bring children into such an important business event, but I suppose exceptions can be made." A few nearby guests chuckled politely, unsure whether they supposed to. Rowan didn't answer. He simply held her gaze. Daphne straightened and turned toward a couple standing beside her, a man in a charcoal suit and a woman in emerald silk. "This is my nephew," she said lightly. "He's still learning how to behave in rooms like this. Not every child is naturally suited to represent a brand built on refinement." The words landed softly, almost elegantly. That was her talent. She never struck you outright. She polished the knife first. I felt Rowan's fingers tighten around mine. "He's 9, I said. "He's here to support his great-grandmother." "Of course," Daphne replied quickly, lifting her hands as if in surrender. "We all support Mom. We just have to be mindful of image, especially in our church circle. People notice things. They talk." There it was, the thing that had followed me since 2015, when Rowan was 15 and I was 29 and unmarried. The quiet conversations in the Methodist fellowship hall, the tilted heads, the offers of prayer that felt like judgment wrapped in lace. Helen, our mother, appeared at Daphne's shoulder, her smile fixed and brittle. "Let's not make this awkward," she said softly, as if I was the one who had raised my voice. Richard stood a step behind her, jaw tight, eyes skimming the room. He had always believed that peace meant silence. Rowan didn't speak. He just stood there, absorbing the words adults were pretending were harmless. I was about to say something I couldn't take back when a fork clinked against a glass at the head table. The sound carried cleanly through the ballroom. Vivian held the microphone in one hand. She did not look flustered. She did not look old. "I think it's time," she said.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Conversations dimmed. Waiters paused mid-step. Daphne's expression shifted into something rehearsed and warm as she moved closer to the stage, ready to stand at Vivian's side. But my grandmother did not call her forward. Instead, she looked directly at Rowan. Not at Daphne, not at my parents, at my son. Rowan blinked, startled, and then lifted his chin. "When I founded Hartwell Atelier in 1989, Vivian began, I did not do it for applause. I did not do it for image. I did it because I believed discipline and skill outlast charm." A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the room. "Over the past 2 years," she continued, "I have taken steps to ensure that this company remains in steady hands long after I am gone." I felt my heartbeat in my throat. "In September of 2022, I transferred my controlling shares into an irrevocable trust. The documents were finalized and executed with counsel present." A murmur stirred near the investor tables. "The beneficiary of that trust is Rowan Vaughn." For a second, the world did not react. It simply held its breath. Then the murmurs became whispers. Daphne's face drained of color so quickly it was almost clinical. Helen's hand flew to her chest. Richard stared at Vivian as if she had spoken in a language he did not understand. Rowan looked up at me, confused. "Mom." I squeezed his hand. "It's okay." Vivian went on calmly. "The trust was established 6 months before tonight's event. This is not an impulsive decision. It is a measured one." Daphne found her voice. "Mom, this is not the time to—" Vivian raised one finger. "I choose discipline over spotlight. I choose work over performance. That has always been my standard." Silence settled again, heavier this time. From the left side of the room, a man in a navy suit, one of our minority investors, stood slight me. "Ms. Hartwell," he said, "is this arrangement legally secured?" Clara Jensen, our CFO, stepped forward from her place near the stage. "It is," she said clearly. "The trust was drafted and filed in September 2022. I reviewed the documents personally." Daphne turned toward Clara as if she had been betrayed. "You knew?" "I fulfill my responsibilities to the company," Clara replied evenly. The air in the ballroom shifted. Conversations that had once orbited around Daphne now pulled toward Rowan, toward the small boy in a tailored blazer who had not said a single word. Rowan's grip on my hands loosened slightly. He wasn't shrinking, he was thinking. Vivian stepped down from the stage and crossed the space between us. She stopped in front of Rowan and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "This does not mean you owe anyone anything," she told him softly, though the microphone still carried her voice. "It means I believe in who you are becoming." Rowan swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." Behind us, I heard the faint scrape of Daphne's heel against the hardwood floor as she shifted her weight, unsteady for once. The banner above the stage still read 35 years of legacy, but the room no longer felt like a celebration of the past. It felt like a reckoning. I looked at my sister across the crowd, at the shock hardening into something sharper in her eyes. For years, she had assumed the company was an heirloom waiting for her to pick it up. Now it had been placed somewhere she could not reach. The applause began slowly, uncertain, then gathered strength as guests chose a side without saying so aloud. Rowan stood beside me, no longer the child being assessed for suitability. He stood as the center of a decision that had been made long before tonight. And in the thick, stunned quiet that followed, I understood that whatever had just shifted in that ballroom would not settle back into place.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 2: The Golden Child File. People began to move again, but the air never quite returned to normal. Daphne did not come near us for the rest of the evening. She stayed on the opposite side of the ballroom, speaking in tight, urgent clusters, her hands cutting through the air as if she could reshape what had just happened by force of will. Helen hovered beside her, whispering, while Richard stood rigid and silent, staring at the floor as though eye contact might make the decision permanent. Rowan leaned against me as the applause faded and the band resumed playing something soft and inoffensive. He looked up at me with the same steady expression he wore when he was trying to solve a math problem. "Does this mean I did something wrong?" he asked quietly. "No," I said immediately. "You did nothing wrong." He studied my face for a moment, making sure I meant it, then nodded once and turned his attention back to the room. He had always been like that. He absorbed information, sorted it internally, and moved forward without drama. It had not always been that way for me. In 2015, when Rowan was born, I was 29 years old and unmarried. His father and I had already been unraveling for months, though no one in my family knew the details. They only knew what mattered to them. There would be no wedding photos, no carefully worded announcement in the church bulletin, just a baby. Helen told me she loved me the day I brought him home from WakeMed, but she said it with a tightness in her mouth that felt like apology to someone else. Richard did not come to the hospital. He said he had a prior commitment at church. By the time Rowan was baptized, the whispers in the Methodist Fellowship Hall had found a rhythm. Women with perfect blowouts and monogrammed Bibles asked if I needed prayer. Men shook my hand a little too firmly and avoided my eyes. I learned to smile and say we were doing fine. Daphne handled it differently. She had been married for 3 years by then, already living in a townhome in Cary with granite countertops and coordinated throw pillows. She arrived at the baptism in a pale blue dress and told anyone who would listen that family was everything, that we all make choices, that some choices simply have consequences. She did not have to say the rest. Everyone knew what she meant. The following year, in 2016, Vivian decided it was time to prepare for succession. Hartwell Atelier had grown beyond a boutique brand. We had secured contracts with 2 regional department stores, and the company needed structured leadership beyond talent and instinct. Daphne was the obvious candidate. She had always assumed she would inherit the company. So had everyone else. Vivian offered to fund a part-time MBA program for her at North Carolina State University. It was a generous investment. The understanding was clear. Daphne would learn the financial and operational discipline required to run a $10 million enterprise. For the first few weeks, she posted photos of textbooks in campus coffee shops captioned with words like growth and legacy. Helen shared every post. By mid-semester, the enthusiasm dimmed. I did not know the details at first. I was busy raising a toddler and rebuilding my own career in operations consulting, but Clara Jensen knew. Clara had joined Hartwell Atelier in 2012 and had become CFO 3 years later. She was precise, measured, and unafraid of spreadsheets. She did not gossip, but she documented everything. In November 2016, Clara sent an internal email to Vivian. I saw it years later when the trust documents were being compiled. The subject line read, "Draft Financial Projections." The body of the email was short and factual. The report Daphne had submitted was incomplete. Revenue columns did not reconcile. Cost assumptions were missing. When Clara had asked for clarification, Daphne had replied that she was not an accountant and that details could be adjusted later. Vivian did not yell. She never yelled. She asked for the corrected report within 72 hours. It never came. Daphne completed 2 semesters of the MBA program and then quietly withdrew. She told Helen the workload was unreasonable. She told church friends that academics were not her calling. She told herself she did not need a degree to run a fashion brand. The company continued to grow anyway, but Clara took on more responsibility. Vivian stopped discussing succession at family dinners. By 2022, it had become clear that Hartwell Atelier required stability that charm could not provide. Supply chain disruptions during the pandemic had forced restructuring. We renegotiated vendor contracts in Durham and adjusted production timelines in Charlotte. It was not glamorous work. It was survival. In September of that year, Vivian called me into her office. The trust documents were spread across her desk in careful stacks. "I am not asking for your permission. I am informing you of my decision," she said calmly. The irrevocable trust transferred her controlling shares out of personal ownership. Clara and an external trustee were named as co-fiduciaries. Rowan was listed as sole beneficiary. The structure ensured professional management until he reached 25. I remember staring at the line with his name on it, feeling both pride and fear. Daphne was not told immediately. Vivian believed in timing. For over a year, nothing outward changed. Daphne continued to attend industry events, to introduce herself as the future of Hartwell Atelier. Helen and Richard continued receiving their monthly stipend of $14,800, categorized as consulting and family support. It had been in place since 2015. In January 2024, 1 month before the gala, Daphne sent Vivian an email requesting an increase in that stipend. Expenses had risen, she wrote. Maintaining a certain lifestyle was important for brand perception. She proposed an additional $3,000 per month. Clara forwarded the email to Vivian with a single line beneath it. "This is not aligned with current cash flow priorities." Vivian did not respond to Daphne directly. Instead, she confirmed the final steps of the trust transfer and scheduled the gala. After the announcement at the Whitmore Hotel, the reaction was not immediate, as it rarely is. Shock tends to masquerade as silence. The real response began 2 weeks later. In early March 2024, a friend from church texted me a screenshot of a social media story. Daphne stood in her kitchen, framed by white cabinetry and soft lighting. She spoke about the difficulty of watching loved ones make decisions when they are not fully themselves. She mentioned aging. She mentioned vulnerability. She never said Vivian's name, but she did not need to. The implication was clear. I forwarded the screenshot to Marcus Reed, Vivian's attorney. Marcus was 54, with a dry voice and a talent for reducing emotional chaos to bullet points. "We anticipated this," he said when I called him. "Send me everything." On March 14, 2024, a formal cease and desist letter was delivered to Daphne's residence in Cary. It cited defamation concerns and demanded removal of any content implying diminished capacity on Vivian's part. It requested written confirmation within 48 hours. The story disappeared by the next morning. Helen called me that afternoon, her voice trembling with anger rather than fear. "How could you let it go this far?" she asked. "Your grandmother is humiliated. Your sister is devastated." "Your sister implied that Grandma is mentally unstable. That is not devastation. That is strategy." "You know how she is. She speaks before she thinks." I did not answer. The following evening, Richard called. His tone was not trembling. It was controlled, the way it used to be when he disciplined us as children. "You need to fix this. This is tearing the family apart." I stood in my kitchen watching Rowan at the table as he carefully aligned pieces of cardboard for a small model bridge he was building. He was humming to himself, unaware of the weight in my hand. "What exactly am I fixing?" I asked slowly. "You know what I mean. This inheritance mess, the legal threats. You have always been the reasonable one. Talk to your grandmother, calm this down." I felt something settle in me, something that had been unstable for years. My son is not a public relations issue, I said slowly. He is not a stain on your church reputation, and he is not responsible for anyone's disappointment. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You are overreacting, he said. No, I replied. I am reacting exactly once. He inhaled sharply, as if I had struck him. You are choosing this over your own family. I looked at Rowan again. He had finished aligning the bridge supports and was now testing the structure with gentle pressure, adjusting where it bent. I am choosing my child, I said. When I ended the call, the quiet in my kitchen felt different from the quiet in the ballroom 2 weeks earlier. This one was not stunned. It was deliberate. The cease and desist had drawn a legal boundary. My words had drawn a personal one. And for the first time since Rowan was born, I understood that the escalation had moved out of the realm of whispers and into something documented, dated, and enforceable.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Don't you?
Chapter 3. Boundaries with Teeth. April arrived with a clarity that felt almost surgical. On April 1st, the automatic transfer that had landed in my parents' account on the 1st of every month since 2015 did not arrive. $14,800 labeled consulting and family support simply stopped. Clara sent me a brief confirmation email that morning. Stipend discontinued effective today per board instruction. Documentation archived. There was no celebration attached to it, just a line drawn. 2 days later, my doorbell camera chimed while I was helping Rowan pack his lunch for school. I glanced at my phone and felt my stomach tighten. Daphne stood on my porch in oversized sunglasses, her posture rigid. Grant was beside her, jaw set, hands in his pockets. Rowan noticed the change in my face. "Who is it?" "Your aunt and uncle," I said evenly. He looked toward the door, then back at me. "Are you going to answer?" I considered it for half a second. Then I walked to the front door and opened it without stepping aside. Daphne removed her sunglasses slowly, as if the gesture itself was a performance. "We need to talk." Grant gave a tight nod. "This has gone far enough." "About what?" I asked. "About the money," Daphne snapped, the word slipping out before she could soften it. Then she recovered. "About Mom's decision, about the trust. You know this is insane." I folded my arms. The trust was executed in September 2022. It is not insane. It is legal. Grant shifted his weight. "Look, we just want to clear up misunderstandings. We need to speak to Rowan." "No." The word came out calm, flat. Daphne blinked. "Excuse me? You do not need to speak to my son." She leaned forward slightly. "He is part of this now. He should understand what he is taking from the rest of us." Rowan had moved behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence at my back. I did not turn around. "What he is taking," I said, "is responsibility, not money." Grant's voice hardened. "We are family. Family does not require private meetings with a 9-year-old. Daphne's composure cracked for a second. "This is not about him. It is about correcting an overreaction." "There was no overreaction," I replied. "There was a decision." Her eyes flicked toward the camera mounted above the doorframe. "You are really recording this?" "Yes," I said. "I am." The silence stretched. Finally, Daphne stepped back, jaw tight. "This is not over," she said. I closed the door without responding. 2 days later, I made a mistake. It was a Wednesday. I had an early meeting in Durham and left before 8. Rowan was off school for a teacher workday and had insisted he was old enough to stay home for a few hours. We had practiced what to do if someone came to the door. "Do not open it unless it's someone we expect," I had told him. I thought that was enough. At 10:32, my phone vibrated during a conference call. The doorbell camera notification showed Helen and Richard standing on the porch. They looked smaller somehow, older. I hesitated. Then I saw the door open. I muted myself and watched the live feed. Rowan stood in the doorway, his hair slightly messy, wearing the old Hartwell Atelier t-shirt he slept in. "Grandma? Grandpa?" he said. Helen smiled wide and practiced. "Sweetheart, can we come in for just a minute? We only want to talk." The camera angle shifted as they stepped inside. I ended the call without explanation and grabbed my keys. By the time I pulled into the driveway 15 minutes later, my pulse was in my throat. I opened the front door and heard Helen's voice drifting from the dining room. "All you have to do is tell your great-grandmother there was a misunderstanding," she was saying gently. "Just explain that you did not mean for any of this to happen." I stepped into the room. Rowan sat at the table, his model bridge spread out in front of him. Cardboard beams, tiny support structures, careful lines drawn in pencil. His face was pale, but steady. Richard stood near the counter, arms crossed. "What is going on?" I asked. Helen turned, startled. "We're just helping him understand the situation." "Helping him understand what, exactly?" Grant gave a tight nod. "You know what. This mess. The stipend was our livelihood. Your sister has bills. And you think my 9-year-old is responsible for that?" Helen's smile faltered. "No one is blaming him. We just need him to tell Vivian that he feels uncomfortable, that this was too much." Rowan looked at me, confusion flickering across his face. "I did not ask for anything," he said quietly. I moved to his side. "You did not." Behind him, I noticed something wrong with the bridge. One of the central supports had been crushed inward. The careful alignment he had shown me the night before was gone. Tyler stood near the hallway entrance, taller than I remembered at 16, staring at his phone. "What happened to this?" I asked. He shrugged. "It fell." "It did not fall," Rowan said, voice tight. "You pushed it." Tyler rolled his eyes. "It's cardboard. Relax." Something inside me snapped into cold focus. "Everyone out," I said. Richard stiffened. "You're overreacting again." "Out," I repeated. Helen tried to reach for Rowan's shoulder. "We only came because we care." Rowan pulled back, his voice shaking but firm. "I don't want to talk about this anymore." The room went still. Richard stared at him as if he had just spoken a foreign language. I walked them to the door, opened it, and waited. Tyler brushed past me without apology. Helen hesitated on the porch. "We're still your parents," she said softly. "You don't get to redefine my child's life," I replied. After they left, Rowan stood in the doorway for a long moment, then looked up at me. "I thought they were going to say sorry," he said. I knelt beneath him. "I know." He swallowed. "I don't want them to come here again." "You won't have to see them unless you choose to." He nodded once, jaw tight in a way that did not belong to a 9-year-old. That afternoon, I photographed the damaged model from multiple angles. I drove it to a local design supply shop in Cary that had agreed to help him with materials before. The technician examined it and shook his head. This was not an accident. The central supports were forced inward. The repair and replacement materials totaled $2,180. I forwarded the receipt and the doorbell footage to Marcus within the hour. His reply came quickly. "Trespass warning will be drafted. Civil liability for property damage will be included. No further direct contact advised." The letter was delivered the next day. It cited the April 4th incident, specified the amount of damage, and formally prohibited unannounced visits to my residence. The reaction was immediate. 3 days later, Clara called me. "They showed up at the Charlotte showroom this morning." "Who?" "Daphne, Richard, and Grant. They demanded to speak with Vivian, claimed they had a right as family." "And?" "Security escorted them out. It has been logged." I could picture it clearly, the polished floors, the front desk, the quiet authority of a uniformed guard asking them to leave. For years, the word family had functioned as a master key. It opened doors, excused behavior, erased lines. Now it triggered a report. That evening, Rowan sat at the kitchen table, carefully reconstructing the damaged bridge with new materials. "I don't want to see them anymore," he said without looking up. "You don't have to. Not even if they say sorry? Especially then." He paused, then nodded slowly. "Okay." I picked up my phone and began the practical work of separation. I changed my number, I updated our privacy settings, I sent Marcus a short email confirming that all communication from my parents or sister should be routed through his office. As I clicked send, the house felt quieter than it had in years. Not empty, protected.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 4. When the Money Stopped. By August 2024, the silence had turned expensive. Grant lost his job on a humid Tuesday morning. I did not hear it from him. I heard it from Clara, who heard it from a vendor in Charlotte whose brother worked at the same real estate firm. "Sales are down across the region," Clara said over the phone. He was mid-tier management. Those are the first to go when numbers slip. I pictured Grant in his pressed button-downs and carefully managed confidence, suddenly handed a cardboard box. The market had cooled after a volatile year. Commission-based income is a fragile thing when the economy inhales too sharply. The stipend had already stopped in April. $14,800 a month gone. By August, there was no longer a buffer. Daphne tried to pivot quickly. That was always her instinct. She updated her LinkedIn profile, adding strategic brand consultant to her headline. She posted polished photos of herself at networking events in Raleigh and Durham, speaking about leadership and resilience. Then she started applying for marketing positions. One of the applications landed on Clara's desk indirectly. A small apparel company in Greensboro contacted Clara for a reference. They had received Daphne's resume and noticed her association with Hartwell Atelier. Clara called me afterward. "They asked about her operational experience," she said. I told them the truth. "Which is?" "She has not completed a financial projection report since 2016. There was no bitterness in Clara's tone, only precision. 2 weeks later, Daphne did not get the job. She called Vivian that evening. I know because Vivian told me about it herself, her voice calm as ever. "She asked if I would intervene," Vivian said. "She believes my endorsement would change things." "And will it?" "No," she replied simply. "Endorsements cannot replace work." The real confrontation came in early September. I was at the Raleigh showroom reviewing fall inventory when Clara's assistant hurried toward me, eyes wide. "She is here," she whispered. Daphne stood near the front display table, dressed impeccably despite the strain beginning to show around her mouth. Richard was not with her. Grant was not with her. She was alone. I stepped back, allowing Clara to handle it. Clara approached her with the steady posture of someone who had prepared for this possibility. "You do not have an appointment," Clara said evenly. "I am family," Daphne replied. "I will see my mother." "Vivian is not available for unscheduled meetings." "This is my company, too," Daphne snapped, the composure cracking at the edges. "No," Clara said calmly, "it is not." The word seemed to echo against the glass display cases. Employees had begun to notice. A seamstress paused mid-stitch. A sales associate stood frozen behind the register. I watched Daphne's face as the realization landed publicly rather than privately. "You cannot shut me out," she said, lowering her voice, but not enough. Clara's expression did not change. "I can enforce the trust agreement. If you do not leave voluntarily, I will ask security to assist you." For a moment, Daphne looked as though she might argue further. Then the front doors opened and a uniformed security officer stepped inside. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I need you to step outside." There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, just the quiet humiliation of being escorted past employees who had once deferred to her. As the doors closed behind her, the room exhaled. Later that afternoon, Clara walked into my office. "It had to happen," she said. I nodded. "I know." But seeing it happen and knowing it are different things. The fallout extended beyond business. Helen had been active in the women's ministry at church for nearly a decade. She organized meal trains, coordinated holiday outreach, led small group studies. She prided herself on being a pillar of composure. In October, Reverend Collins asked to meet with her privately. I did not attend. I heard about it from a friend who still moved comfortably within that circle. He told her the church does not condone emotional manipulation involving children, my friend said carefully. He did not use our names. He did not have to. Helen lost her coordinating role before Thanksgiving. She called me that night. "This is your doing," she said, her voice brittle with contained fury. "No," I replied quietly, "it is the result of choices. We were trying to protect our reputation. At the expense of a 9-year-old? She did not answer. By late fall, financial pressure began to show in visible ways. A mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing Daphne at a bank in Cary discussing refinancing options. A few weeks later, Clara confirmed what I had suspected. She has taken out a second mortgage, Clara said. Public records show it was finalized in November. To maintain lifestyle? I asked. Likely. There's a specific kind of strain that comes from trying to preserve appearances when the foundation has shifted. It is not loud, it is constant. December passed without reconciliation. There were no holiday cards, no invitations, only the occasional forwarded rumor that Daphne was telling friends she had been blindsided by betrayal. In January 2025, I drove past my parents' neighborhood on my way back from a meeting in Cary. I did not plan it, it was muscle memory. The house where I had grown up stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. Brick facade, 2-car garage, landscaping always trimmed within an inch of regulation. A white sign pierced the frozen lawn. For sale. I slowed without meaning to. The listing price online later that night read $640,000, modest for the area, but more than my parents had ever paid for it. Rowan was at the kitchen table when I returned home, sketching ideas for a new bridge design. He looked up as I set my keys down. "Are they still mad?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "They are adjusting." To what? To consequences. He nodded slowly, absorbing the word the way he absorbed everything. A week later, I saw Daphne for the first time since the showroom incident. She stood on the sidewalk in front of my parents' house, arms wrapped around herself against the January wind. The moving truck was parked in the driveway. Boxes were stacked near the garage. The house looked larger, empty. She did not see me first. She was staring at the front door as if memorizing it. For a moment, I remembered us as girls, racing bicycles down that same street, competing over who could ride faster without holding the handlebars. She had always ridden ahead of me, glancing back just enough to make sure I saw her. Now she stood still. When she finally noticed my car idling at the curb, our eyes met across the yard. There was no anger in her expression this time, only disbelief and something like grief. I did not roll down the window. I did not wave. I drove on, the image of her shrinking in my rearview mirror as the sign in the yard remained upright and immovable.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Don't you?
Chapter 5. The Child Who Refused to Shrink. Spring thawed into summer without asking anyone's permission. By June 2025, Rowan had turned 10. He was taller, leaner, his hands more confident when they moved across a table of materials. The kitchen had become his workshop again. Cardboard replaced with lightweight wood, glue replaced with clamps and measured joints. The Summer Youth Design Showcase was held at a community art center in downtown Raleigh, a modest brick building that smelled faintly of sawdust and paint. Hartwell Atelier had sponsored a small grant for the program, but Rowan had applied like any other child. He filled out the form himself, printing carefully, listing his project as Modular Pedestrian Bridge Concept for Neighborhood Greenways. He did not mention the trust. He did not mention legacy. He mentioned that he liked building things that held weight. The first time we visited the art center for orientation, he walked ahead of me, not in defiance, but in independence. Other children milled around folding tables, some nervous, some loud. A volunteer handed him a name badge. "Rowan Vaughn," she read. "What are you working on?" "A bridge," he said simply. She smiled. "For cars?" "For people," he replied. "Cars already have enough space." I watched from a few feet away, something warm and fierce settling in my chest. That night, after dinner, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, pencil tapping lightly against his sketchbook. "Mom," he said, not looking up. "Yes? Is it because of me that they hate you?" The question did not sound accusatory. It sounded analytical, as if he were trying to solve a variable. I set down my glass. "No," I said carefully. "Adults are responsible for their own choices." He frowned slightly. "But if I was not in the trust?" "If you were not in the trust, they would still have to choose how to act," I said. "The trust did not create who they are. It revealed it." He absorbed that in silence. "So it is not my fault." "It is not your fault." He nodded once, satisfied for now, and returned to his sketch. The last attempt at control came in the form of an email. It arrived in early July, routed through an address Marcus had set up for filtered communication. The subject line was simple: "For the record." I did not open it immediately. I forwarded it to Marcus first. He called me 20 minutes later. "It is from Daphne," he said. "Would you like me to summarize?" "Yes." "She alleges that you have manipulated Rowan's perception of the family. She uses the phrase poisoned narrative. She implies emotional alienation." I felt something cold settle into place. "Does she request contact?" "She suggests supervised reconciliation." "And your recommendation?" "My recommendation is that we respond once, formally, and then cease engagement." Marcus drafted the reply that afternoon. It stated clearly that further unsolicited communication would be considered harassment. It reiterated the existing boundaries and the documented incidents of April 2024. It closed with a warning that additional defamatory statements would result in legal action. He copied Daphne and her attorney. The response never came. That evening, Rowan found me in the living room, laptop open on my knees. "Was that from them?" he asked. "Yes." He hesitated. "Can I see it?" I considered the weight of that question. Then I nodded and turned the screen toward him. He read slowly, lips moving slightly as he processed the words. "Poisoned narrative." He looked up. "I do not feel poisoned." I smiled faintly. "I'm glad." He reached forward and clicked the delete button. "You do not have to read their emails anymore," he said. "I do not want to." That simple. The following Sunday, I attended church for the first time in months, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to see whether the room still shifted when I walked in. It did not. After the service, a woman named Teresa, who had once avoided eye contact in the fellowship hall, approached me near the coffee urns. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "For what?" "I believed things I should have questioned. I am sorry." There was no spectacle in her voice, no attempt at justification. "Thank you," I said. Across the room, Reverend Collins nodded in my direction, not warmly, not coldly, simply acknowledging. Reputation, I realized, is less about control than about endurance. The showcase arrived on a bright Saturday morning in late July. The art center buzzed with parents and folding chairs. Projects lined the walls: solar ovens, small robotic arms, a scaled model of a community garden. Rowan's bridge stood on a waist-high platform, 2 clean spans supported by triangular trusses he'd measured down to the millimeter. He'd labeled each component in neat handwriting. A judge in a blue polo shirt crouched to examine it.
"Tell me why you chose this design," she said. Rowan did not glance at me. "Because triangles distribute weight evenly, and if one support fails, the others can compensate." The judge nodded slowly. "That sounds practical." "It is," he said. "People need structures that do not collapse when someone leans on them." I felt my throat tighten. Later, as participants were invited to stand briefly on the small stage and speak about their projects, Rowan adjusted his name badge and stepped forward when his name was called. He did not search for me in the crowd. He did not scan for familiar faces. He walked to the center of the stage, hands at his sides. "My name is Rowan Vaughn," he said clearly. "I built a pedestrian bridge because I think communities should be connected. If something is strong, it should carry weight for others." His voice did not shake. He finished, nodded once, and stepped down. There was applause, not thunderous, not dramatic, steady. As he returned to his seat beside me, he leaned in slightly. "I was not nervous," he said. "I know," I replied. Across the room, sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching the edges of his carefully measured structure. It held its shape without bending. So did he.
Chapter 6: What Inheritance Really Means. By the end of 2025, the noise had thinned into something almost unrecognizable. The final trust review meeting was held in early December at the Raleigh office, the same conference room where Clara had once walked me through balance sheets and vendor contracts. The long walnut table looked the same. The documents were thicker. Rowan sat beside me, legs barely reaching the edge of the chair, hands folded with deliberate stillness. He had insisted on attending. "I want to understand what my name is on," he had said. Clara adjusted her glasses and opened the binder in front of her. Vivian sat at the head of the table, posture straight despite the winter pressing into her bones. "This meeting is procedural," Clara said calmly. "The trust remains irrevocable. Rowan Vaughn is confirmed as sole beneficiary. Management authority remains with the fiduciary structure until he reaches 25. Rowan glanced at me, then back at Clara. "So I do not control anything yet," he said. "Not yet," Clara replied. "You inherit responsibility in stages." Vivian's eyes softened slightly. "Inheritance is not money," she said. "It is discipline. It is restraint. It is knowing when to act and when to refuse." Rowan absorbed that without flinching. I could see the difference between this room and the ballroom from February 2024. That night had been spectacle. This was structure. No applause, no murmurs, just signatures, confirmations, and a future carefully documented. After the meeting, Rowan lingered by the window overlooking Fayetteville Street. "Do you think they are still angry?" he asked quietly. "Probably," I said, "but anger does not equal power." He considered that. The last confrontation happened unexpectedly, though in hindsight it felt inevitable. Hartwell Atelier sponsored a small holiday community event in downtown Raleigh that December. A tree lighting, a charity drive, live music. It was public, warm, intentionally visible. The kind of gathering where reputation either stands or falls without anyone announcing it. Rowan stood beside me near the hot chocolate table, hands wrapped around a paper cup. He had grown since the summer, shoulders broader, posture steadier. He no longer scanned rooms for threat. I noticed Daphne before he did. She stood across the plaza, coat pulled tight against the cold, watching us. Not with fury this time, not with accusation, something more desperate, as if proximity might reverse time. She began walking toward us. Security noticed, too. We had hired 2 officers for the event, a precaution after everything that had happened in 2024. One of them stepped into her path before she reached us. "Ma'am," he said gently, "this area is restricted for staff and registered families." "I am family," she replied. The officer did not move. Rowan turned at the sound of her voice. His eyes met hers across the space. For a moment, no one spoke. Daphne tried to step around the officer. "I just want to talk to him." The officer looked at Rowan. It was the first time anyone had looked at him for instruction in a public confrontation. Rowan did not look at me. He took one step forward, just enough to be heard. "I do not want to talk," he said clearly. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Daphne froze. "You do not understand," she began. "I understand," Rowan said. There was no anger in his voice, no tremor, just clarity. The officer gently extended his arm again. "Ma'am." This time, she stopped resisting. She looked at Rowan as if memorizing him, then turned away. No scene, no shouting, just distance. I felt something settle inside me then, something I had mistaken for revenge all along. Revenge is not watching someone lose their house. It is not watching them escorted from a showroom. It is not even hearing an apology in a church hallway. Revenge, if that is what it is removing the audience. It is refusing to perform pain for someone else's comfort. My parents did not go bankrupt. Daphne did not disappear into ruin. They downsized, they adjusted, they lost influence in rooms that once amplified them. What they no longer had was control over our story. Later that night, back at home, Rowan returned to the small desk in his room where scraps of wood and graphite sketches were spread out in careful disarray. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the soft rasp of sandpaper against grain. He did not look up when I leaned against the doorframe. "You were brave tonight," I said. He shrugged slightly. "I was just honest." That was new. The house felt quiet, but not heavy. No waiting for the next knock, no checking the camera feed. Just the ordinary rhythm of a child working on something he believed in. Vivian called before bedtime. "I heard about tonight," she said. "Clara keeps me informed." "He handled it himself," I replied. "Good," she said softly. "That's the point." After I hung up, I walked past Rowan's door again. The light was still on. He was measuring a support beam, tongue pressed lightly against the corner of his mouth in concentration. He had stopped shrinking, and so had I. If you have ever stood in a room where silence was used as a weapon, if you have ever been told to keep the peace at the cost of your child's dignity, you know how heavy that choice can feel. So I will leave you with this. If you had to choose between preserving family harmony and protecting your child, which would you choose? And if this story resonated with you, stay with us. There are more stories about boundaries, strength, and the quiet kind of justice that doesn't need applause. In the next room, the steady scratch of sandpaper continued, patient and unhurried, shaping something that would hold.